This is the first part of our two-part online lecture series on the art of ancient Rome. And these two lectures are organized chronologically, where the first lecture is covering the two earlier periods, the Republican and early Empire period, and then the second lecture will cover the High and Late Empire periods. So we have a map here just so you can get an idea of where in the world the Roman Empire was. It was in a lot of places in the world. It's quite a large and expansive empire. But I just want to point out that this map does date to the High Empire period, which is the time when Rome is at its height in terms of power, wealth, and territorial expansion. The point is that with this expansive empire, it's going to allow for a lot of diversity because there are lots of people that are part of the empire. All right. So before we really get into Roman art, I do want to talk about the Greek influence that we see in Roman art. This is very important because this is one of the main features, one of the main characteristics of Roman art is this very strong Greek influence. And what's interesting is we can actually be very specific in the nature of this influence. In fact, we can take it to a particular date and a particular person when we see how this influence came about. And this turning point comes in the year 211 BCE. There was a Roman general by the name of Marcellus who had come back to Rome with his ship full of all of the conquests of war and battle and the usual spoils of war. And so he had gold and silver and weapons, but he also brought back art as well. And some of that art had come from ancient Greece. When they took the art off the ships, the Romans were immediately impressed by the level of artistry that they saw in the Greek art. And this sparked this craze where the Romans began to copy Greek art in large numbers. Now they copied the art in two different ways. One of the ways was they directly copied it. Exact copying in ways that you really can't tell the difference. What is the Greek work? What is the Roman work? The other type of copying that we see is what you're seeing here on the screen, where there's a lot of similarities. You can certainly see the influence, but it's not a direct replication. We should recognize the work on the left, Doryphorus, by the artist Polykleitos, comes from Greece. Now, if we look over here at this portrait of Augustus, we can see that this sculpture is very much looking to Doryphorus in its style and its approach to representing figure. So Augustus was the first emperor of Rome. Many people think that it was Julius Caesar, but technically no. The first emperor is Augustus, and this is actually what ushers in the early empire period, the transition into an emperorship as a form of a political system, rather than the Republican period, which is characterized by a Republican form of government. Now, if you compare the two here, you can see that with Augustus, we have him in the same carefully measured pose as Doryphorus with the contrapposto stance. We do have the extension of the arm. This was extended to hold the spear in Doryphorus. Here we have the arm extended outward. This is a common Roman gesture seen in sculpture that's meant to indicate speaking, that this figure is in the process of speaking. He could be speaking to the military, he could be speaking to his people. It doesn't really matter because the significance of the speaking gesture remains the same. Now we have emphasized musculature seen by the nudity in the Doryphorus figure. We don't have the nudity in the Augustus portrait, but we do have the reference to musculature with the breastplate that does have the musculature carved in. And in this breastplate we have varying scenes of war, scenes of deities, which work together to talk about the ways in which Augustus came to power. He came to power because he was victorious in battle, fighting against two other people for control over Rome. And he includes gods on there to show that the gods were looking down, that he had their favor, and that was part of the reason why he was able to prevail. We've seen this time and time again in this class, this idea that rulers use gods as ways to, and religion as ways to bolster their power. Now there's one other thing I want to point out before we move on, and that is this representation of Augustus is looking very youthful, right? Youthful in terms of, no wrinkles, but also no beard. This was the common way that Augustus represented himself in art, as eternally youthful. Augustus ruled over Rome for a long time. Throughout this long time, this did not change. And he did this because he wanted to show that he was this supernatural being that never aged, to show that he was related to the gods or semi-divine. Also a way to convey power, which is another strategy of political power that we've seen other rulers use in previous time periods. All right, let's talk about architecture. The architecture also, as you can see, conveying a Greek influence. Now, Roman architecture does not just full-on replicate Greek structures. There is an Etruscan influence as well, and if we could kind of describe Roman architecture in like one sentence, we could say it is architecture that has both Greek and Etruscan features. The Etruscan features make sense because the Etruscans are the artistic forefathers of the Romans, right? They occupied the Italian peninsula prior to the formation of the Roman Empire. So looking at this, see if you can, pause the video for a moment and see if you can identify the features that feel Greek to you and the features that feel Roman to you. So, what are some Greek and some Roman features? So we'll start with the Greek features. We do see that we have a Greek order. We have the Ionic order, which we see with the volutes up here at the Capitol. We also see that we have a rectangular building, which seems to be in appearance to the majority of Greek temple types that we studied when we were looking at ancient Greece. The columns, this is a big one, right? The columns, they go all the way around, okay, which we also know is a feature of Greek architecture. We have an entablature, we have a pediment, these are all Greek features as well. Now, the thing that is Etruscan about this is that we have an emphasized entryway. Okay, this is Etruscan because we know that in Greek architecture there is no emphasized entryway. This was something that was characteristic of Etruscans. So we have the emphasized entryway, and this is seen in the fact that at the front, at the entryway, we have freestanding columns, but over here, as the columns move back, they become engaged. Which simply means that they are sunk into the wall. This creates more of a visual prominence, drawing attention to the front of the structure. Now, one other thing I just want to point out, and this is something that's Greek, is that this structure is made of stone, but they faced it with a white surface, and they did that to mimic the white appearance of the Greek structures. Greek structures were built out of marble because marble was a readily available and abundant material. Marble is not abundant in the Italian peninsula, and so they had to mimic its appearance. This is another example of Roman architecture that is inspired by that of Greece, and the inspiration is coming from the temple type. This is a round temple. Round temples were Greek. The idea was imported into Rome. We do not see round temple types in Rome prior to contact with Greece. Now, it's Greek in that it's round. It's Greek in that you've got columns that extend all the way around. These are Corinthian columns. Kind of hard to tell, but we have the foliate that's up here on the Capitol. The only difference, and we cannot see it from this view, is that there is an emphasized entryway, and that's something that's distinctly Etruscan. The mixing of Greek and Etruscan influence is also seen with Rome as well. Now, what's really, though, important about this structure is not simply that it conveys Greek influence, but the material itself actually is significant. It's an innovative material used to construct this building that was developed by the Romans, and that is concrete. Concrete was invented by the Romans. Now, in your book it says that concrete's invented in the Near East, which, to be quite frank, I don't really understand. I was always taught and was understanding that it was invented by the Romans. I even contacted my former professor in grad school, who is an architectural specialist, so he knows a thing or two about architecture, and asked him, is concrete invented in Rome or the Near East? And he was like, what are you talking about? Everybody knows that concrete is invented by Rome. Sky's blue, concrete invented by Romans. So concrete invented by Rome. This is an especially strong material that is going to allow for the incredible architecture that we're going to see produced in Rome, things like the Colosseum. So here's another example of Roman architecture, the amphitheater. All right, the amphitheater is based off of the Greek theater, but actually it's two Greek theaters put together. Amphi means two, and then theater, two theaters. So the Greek theater was like a half circle shape. The Roman theater is a full circle shape. The reason why the Greeks were half circle shapes is because they did not have concrete, they did not have materials strong enough to create such a large freestanding structure. So they had to buttress the sides of their theaters up against hillsides. Now, because the Romans had concrete, they were able to put the two together to create a round amphitheater that could be freestanding and still remain strong, stable, and upright. So that's one difference. Another difference between Greek and Roman theaters is what they were used for. Now, both were used as entertainment sites. That is a commonality, but the difference lies in the type of entertainment. The Greeks used the theater for theatrical productions, plays, dramas, comedies, that sort of thing. Most commonly, though, the Romans used the theater for gladiatorial combat. The gladiatorial combat would take place in the central area right in here, which is the arena. Arena is Latin for sand, which was used to soak up the blood of the injured gladiators, animals. Now, if you were going to go to the amphitheater to view entertainment, you couldn't just walk in and sit wherever you would like. They actually had assigned seating based on hierarchy, which is the same thing today, right? If you don't have that much money, you sit in pretty much the worst seats in the stadium. Same idea here. Now, the important thing, though, is with this specific seating based on hierarchy, the structure itself becomes a facilitator for the display of power. Because as you sit in the theater, the amphitheater, and watch the entertainment, you can very clearly see levels of hierarchy and who has more power, more influence in the society versus other people. What's interesting about this amphitheater, okay, built around the 70 BCE, was that this amphitheater, through its material, through its function, through its display of power and hierarchy, is a direct precursor to the Colosseum. So it's not like one day they just build the Colosseum and this is just this great idea no one ever thought about. The Colosseum represents a development from structures such as the one we see here. All right, let's talk about some political artwork. Here we're looking at a coin that depicts a portrait of Julius Caesar. Now, it might be surprising in an art history class to look at a coin, because these might not be considered traditional forms of art. Coins, though, actually are very important to art historical study because they can give us a lot of insight into imagery, and actually very often coins are used to help us make identifications of figures that are seen in art. Now, with coins in Rome, the coins initially started out very similar to Greek coins, depiction of deities, gods. But Julius Caesar, and this very much attests to his level of power and influence, convinced the Senate to allow him to have his portrait on a coin. And they complied, obviously, and we see that this is the result. Now think about this. This is a brilliant, brilliant political move. And by the way, he's not the first ruler to put his image on the coin. We see this before. But it's a very smart political move because this is a portrait of Julius Caesar. So when people carry money, they physically carry on their body an image of their ruler. And any time they ever participate in an economic transaction, which could be multiple times in one day, they see the portrait of Caesar. He's always there. He's always present. He always presides over the economic transactions. You can't forget about him because you're constantly seeing his face. So very smart. Now there's just one other thing I want to mention about this coin, and that is the way that Caesar's depicted. You will notice that we're actually seeing some very clear and visible signs of aging. We have the kind of loose skin on the cheek, receding hairline, and then all of these neck wrinkles. So he's clearly shown as an aged individual. Now in the Republican period, they actually did often show age in sculptures of powerful men. The age was seen as a marker of wisdom, of knowledge, and of course that's something that leaders and powerful figures wanted to be associated with. It was Augustus who came after Caesar that changed that tradition and started to show himself as perpetually youthful, as this person who never aged. What actually happens, as you're going to come to see in the next lecture, is that we go back and forth. We go from aged to youthfully ideal to aged, and then in the end, in the High Empire period, we go back to that youthful being that doesn't age. Here we have the Ara Pacis. This was a work of art that was commissioned by Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. And he commissioned this monument to celebrate what he saw as one of his most important achievements in Rome, which was bringing peace back to Rome. When Julius Caesar was assassinated, Rome was thrown into this turmoil of civil conflict. There was not anyone who could just readily step into Caesar's place. There were 3 men that actually were potential candidates, and people, stood behind the candidates that they supported the most. It made divisions in society. When Augustus came back into power, he was able to sort of quell that dissension, and he brought peace. He also sort of saw his tenure as the Emperor of Rome as a time where he ushers in an unprecedented peace and prosperity to Rome. This altar is celebrating all of this. You can see that at the exterior of the altar, we have all of this gorgeous relief sculpture. A lot of plant motifs along the bottom register here, and then in the top register we have imagery. The imagery changes. We have some imagery that is depicting mythological figures. We have some imagery that's depicting political figures and political scenes. I'm going to show you one of each to give you a sense of what Augustus is trying to say here. So this is an example of a relief that shows mythological figures. This is Tellus, who is the earth goddess. Now some people say that this is Pax, the goddess of peace. I say it doesn't really matter. If it's Tellus or if it's peace, the messaging is exactly the same. Now see for a minute, pause the video and see for a minute if you can conduct an iconographical analysis. If you can determine what symbols are significant here and what they are communicating. Now, if you thought that the majority of the symbols were conveying a notion of fertility, you're absolutely correct. This image is full of references to fertility. Now we have here the central figure, which we can assume is Tellus because of her central placement in the composition, as well as the hierarchical scale. We also have implied lines that lead the viewer's gaze to focus on her as the focal point. Now we can see that there is a little bit of a compositional emphasis on her breasts, with the close proximity of the babies that are gesturing towards the breasts. So the breasts represent fertility. The babies represent fertility. They are holding these round objects. What do you think these could be? They are eggs. Eggs represent fertility. We have animals down here peacefully coexisting. Fertility. Abundance of plant forms. Fertility. Exposed breasts over here. Fertility. Right over here, a jug of water. Fertility. All of these things, fertility. Now this here is a woman who sits on a bird. This here is a woman who sits on a sea serpent. This represents the woman and the bird, the sky. Tellus is the earth, and then here with the sea serpent, the sea. So you have all aspects of this planet being referenced. What does any of this have to do with Augustus? Basically, it has to go back to this idea of Rome thriving, of peace and prosperity. That because of Augustus, there's peace. Because of Augustus, there's so much abundance, that life is amazing, life is wonderful. All of that because of Augustus. You could also even argue that it could be this idea that this goddess, Tellus, is looking down. She's giving Rome all of these beautiful and bountiful blessings because she approves so much of Augustus. Now here's a political image, this image up here at the top, the Imperial Procession. This is a procession that actually happened. It was a procession that consisted of Augustus, his family, and high-ranking nobles in Rome, who made this very official procession to commemorate the start of the creation of the Ara Pacis. So this is a real image. Now, what first strikes interest in people and art historians is the similarities of the imperial procession with the relief sculpture of the Panathenaic procession. This was a relief sculpture that was found on the Parthenon in Greece, right? The most important structure in all of Athens. The Parthenon that sat on top of the Acropolis, dedicated to the city's patron deity of Athena. So it's interesting, why would Augustus want to replicate or refer to this image? It goes beyond simply this Greek influence that's so characteristic of Roman art. What he's trying to do is he's trying to connect himself and his legacy to the grandeur of Greece. Greece was seen as this place that was so advanced in terms of thinking and philosophy and government. They were so advanced in terms of art, such a cultured people. And he wants to affiliate himself by that, by having these political images referencing Greek artwork, so that he's seen as part of this really incredible culture that the Romans respected so much. Now these people, these are actual people that attended the procession. Augustus himself is included in this, although he's not included in the detail of the image that we see here. Now what's noteworthy is not only are we seeing these high-ranking individuals, but we're also seeing the presence of their children. Now, this is actually something quite rare at this time, to be seeing the presence of children in official monuments. What could attribute for them? Now, you could say, oh, this is in the same vein as the Tellus panel, right? This idea of fertility, children representing offspring and all that kind of thing. Actually, though, it's more of propaganda. One of the things that was happening in Rome that was really concerning Augustus was the decline of the middle class. And part of that decline was happening because the middle class was not marrying as often, there were many more divorces, and they weren't having children. It was the decline of the upper class. Did I say middle class? I kind of feel like I did. It's the upper class. The decline of the upper class. Without this really upsets the sort of economic balance of things. And so Augustus wanted to make sure that this wasn't happening. So he created imagery like this to show the people of Rome, like, hey, here we have all these really important people, and they're married, and they are having children. You should do the same thing. He also did this propaganda by utilizing his wife very extensively, his wife Livia. He had tons and tons and tons and tons of images of her produced. She was shown very modest, with her head covered, very sort of innocent, very young, as this way for women to aspire to being the same way. Be modest, be faithful to your husband, be a good wife. Which is ironic considering that when Augustus met Livia and when he married her, she actually was married to someone else and pregnant with someone else's baby. But he overlooks that and uses her as a symbol of female virtue and modesty. He also did things like enacted laws that, paid people stipends to have children and things like this. So this is just an early sort of sampling of some of the art that's produced in Rome. The second lecture will show you art that is produced during the High and Late Empire periods.